It's an African saying that God made man because he liked to hear a story, and we have definitely got the myths to prove that. As far back as humanity has existed, there have been stories, and we aren't stopping anytime soon. So some things that you need to know that are particular to myths. First, myths are based on tradition. So what does that mean? Well, it means they're more than just fun little stories. They serve a purpose that's unique to each culture. Think for a second, if you're a native culture living in Scotland, you aren't going to have a myth about bison because bison don't have anything to do with your everyday lives. If you live in a desert community, you're probably going to pray to some sort of rain deity. But if you live in a rainy environment like Seattle, you'll probably pray to a sun deity. So myths reflect the culture in which they were created. Next, myths reflect universal concerns of mankind. So what do we all go through regardless of where we're born? Well, birth to begin with, and death to end with. Where did we come from? Why are we capable of good and evil? Then let's look at the nature around us. Why does this tree look like that? Why does this volcano erupt? Why is there a typhoon that swept away cities? When there's no science to back it up, how do we explain this? We create myths to help understand what's happening to us. Myths stay true to the nature of life. Really, that means don't expect a happy ending. Sometimes things work out, but a lot of the time they don't, and myths stay true to that. Hercules was not that happy of a story, regardless of the catchy Disney tunes. So think about it for a minute. Myths are based on cultural traditions, deal with things like life and death and natural phenomenon. So it only makes sense that they often act as guides to social norms. Pray to this deity, treat people this way, value these traits, all things that myths would teach you how to do. And myths don't suddenly disappear because modern society came around. Myths have changed and updated as society has changed and updated. Even the old myths haven't disappeared. FTD Floral still uses Hermes, the Greek messenger of the god, as their symbol. Track teams use the winged shoes of Hermes as a logo. I mean, even the White House is codenamed Olympus. So now that you have some background on myths, you can go ahead and read the PBS article, In Search of Myths and Heroes, What is a Myth? And answer that part of the Native American Myths Study Guide. So, the world on the turtle's back is a creation myth. Creation of what? Everything. This is the way that some Iroquois tribes understood that the world had been created. As you read this, think about the creation story in Christianity. In 7 days, God created the earth and all the creatures on it. But in this myth, creatures already exist on earth and help as humans create their society. So how does this story show humans as they interact with nature? How is this different from what we're used to seeing in more Christian myths? This myth also deals with the concept of good and evil. Again, think about how good and evil, or light and dark, are portrayed in Christian view, and how the Iroquois look at them. Again, how does that relate back to the way that we view and interact with nature? Now read The World on the Turtle's Back and answer that section of the study guide. So, in many native tribes, certain animals are revered and have some sort of sacred purpose. This means that in a lot of these myths, these animals are used to teach a lesson. For the Plains tribes, buffaloes and coyotes are two of these sacred animals. If you think about it, it makes total sense. The Plains tribes depended on the buffalo for their living, and coyotes would have been a constant presence out on the plains. So giving them these sacred powers shows how much these tribes actually respected these creatures. Now keep in mind that coyote is meant to be a trickster. This will make a little bit more sense as you go through the story. Now go ahead, read the myth, and answer the study questions. So this is a Cherokee origin myth that, as you can see, explains why the sun is in the sky. You will also notice that the animals in this tale are treated similarly to the animals in the coyote and buffalo story. As you read this story, take note of how animals are portrayed and how the treatment of animals is different between the Native Americans and the European settlers. Why do you think that is? How and why has our treatment of nature developed so differently? Here's a good place to pause so you can read the myth and answer the study guide questions. So fire is an origin myth from the Alabama tribe. It discusses how humans first acquired fire. There is a myth about this in most cultures. I mean, without fire, we can't cook, we can't keep warm, and wild animals would have nothing to fear that would keep them away from, eating us. Also, the first experiences with fire were most likely in the form of lightning. This only kind of confirms that fire comes from the gods. So now, read the myth and answer the study questions. So, Pele's Revenge is a Hawaiian origin myth. However, this myth also deals with something other than natural phenomenon. It deals with human emotion. The goddess Pele gets jealous, which is a very human emotion that the Christian view doesn't necessarily associate with God. This is not something that's unique to this myth. You went over the Greek gods and goddesses before. Emotion and desires of the humankind were all over Mount Olympus. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that these myths portrayed their gods as being more human in nature? So now read Pele's Revenge and answer those study questions. So if you've been paying attention, you've noticed that the religions the Native American tribes practiced and Christianity don't exactly line up. Now add to that the Europeans who came over were Puritans, who were extremely strict about their interpretation of Christianity. Think the Salem witch trials. And you've got the basis for some pretty big tension. So the Puritans basically sent missionaries out to native tribes to make them give up their pagan practices and join Christianity. But it didn't stop there. There were laws enacted that banned the practice of native rituals and dances and painted them as immoral and repugnant. In fact, it was even the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in 1833, Huron Price, who called them that. Laws were passed that made it legal to remove Native Americans from their homes. I'm sure you've covered the Trail of Tears in history class. And it became practice for the government to actually take Native children and send them to a boarding school and force them to assimilate. Many of the children that were taken just kind of disappeared. So this doesn't exactly set a tone of trust between the tribes and the government. And it doesn't really paint Christianity in the best light either. So that's some important background for you as you read The Man Descend the Rain Clouds. There's an underlying distrust and an adherence to tradition that you should really pay attention to. So this is the end of the video. Please read the story The Man Descend the Rain Clouds and answer those study questions.